The sun had just begun its slow climb over the smog-wrapped horizon when Officer Fred Mahoney of the LAPD pulled his patrol car over near South Norton Avenue. At first glance, it looked like a department store mannequin had been tossed onto the empty lot, pale, posed, limbs bent too carefully to be natural. But Mahoney had worked enough homicide scenes to know death when he saw it. He stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot cutting through the early morning silence. One look, and his stomach turned. The body was bisected at the waist, bloodless, drained. The face had been sliced open from the corners of her lips to her ears, a grotesque smile carved into rigor mortis. Then the detectives. It had been hours since she'd returned from South Norton, and still the images clung to the back of her eyelids like tar. Then the press. By noon, half the city knew her name, Elizabeth Short. Her raven hair was spread out like black ink bleeding onto the earth. A photographer arrived within the hour. Whoever did this wanted her to be remembered. She'd been seen around Hollywood's nightclubs, dating soldiers, directors, and small-time crooks. Every paper in the city printed Elizabeth's story or version of it. Aspiring starlet slain, Dahlia of death, Hollywood horror. But she had no family in LA, no one to claim her. His studio reeked of cheap cologne and developer fluid. On his walls hung dozens of photos of wide-eyed girls draped in shadows. Elizabeth's face was among them. But the newspapers called her something else, the Black Dahlia. And a torn photograph on the floor, Elizabeth, smiling, her arm looped through a man's who had been violently scratched out. Detective Evelyn Evie Hart lit a lucky strike as she stared at the crime scene photos scattered across her desk at the LAPD's Homicide Bureau. She was sweet, lonely, but sweet. One name kept surfacing, Dr. Victor Lennox, a former military surgeon turned Hollywood cosmetic doctor known for his charm and discretion. He had a taste for women who wanted to change their faces and their lives. She had dreams, you know? The place was a sprawling Spanish-style villa in the Hollywood Hills with an ornamental fountain and an iron gate. She was a patient. Poor thing wanted a future in the pictures, but had a past she couldn't shake. The kind of place where secrets festered behind satin curtains. "This one's different," muttered her partner, Detective Joe Navarro, tapping the edge of a photo with a chewed pencil. "Detectives," he said coolly. "To what do I owe the honor? Why stage the body so meticulously? A cold, theatrical rhythm? And why send a taunting note?" Sent to the LAPD. It was a manila envelope, wet with gasoline to erase fingerprints. Inside was Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book with several names scratched out in red ink. The city outside buzzed with the noise of people trying to forget the horrors that walked among them. No blood, no mess, just precision. Evie's eyes remained fixed on the victim's haunting smile. "It's surgical," she said. They had her purse, her fingerprints. The victim was a 22-year-old aspiring actress from Boston. The press went wild. Evie wanted to punch every headline. The next morning, they found another clue, a package. Let's just say she was running from something or someone. Most ominous of all was a note made from cut-up newspaper letters. "Hear me, or we'll die." Evie read it twice before slamming her fist on the table. This isn't just a killing, it's a goddamn performance. The address book led them to Cliff Holloway, a 36-year-old photographer with a penchant for portraits of young actresses. "I didn't kill her," Cliff said, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. "She came here for headshots. That's all." Evie noticed a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the table. "You sure that's all?" Joe asked. Cliff hesitated, then nodded. "Don't we all?" Evie thought. Back at the precinct, Evie dug through Elizabeth's timeline. She called in a favor to get his address. He answered the door in a robe, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, his silver hair slicked back like a silent film villain. "Elizabeth Short," Evie said. Did you know her? His lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What kind of past? Joe asked. Victor sipped his scotch. That night, Evie sat alone in her apartment, radio static humming softly from the corner. She couldn't stop thinking about Elizabeth. Why mutilate her? There was something deliberate about it all. This killer wasn't finished. She was sure of it. The haze never lifted in this part of the city. Even the sunlight seemed to slink away. Detective Evelyn Hart adjusted the rearview mirror of her Chevy Fleetline, watching the world behind her grow smaller, a mirror image. Another woman drifting through a city of promises, surrounded by men who spoke in scripts and lies. It was almost dawn, but she hadn't slept. The Dahlia case was unraveling her one sleepless night at a time. Elizabeth Short's face haunted her, not in the way most corpses did, but as something deeper. And now, Evie had a new lead. Inside the precinct, a uniformed officer handed her a sealed envelope. It had arrived just before midnight. Same gaslit envelope, same pasted letters. The message inside was shorter this time. Dahlia had a secret. She isn't the only one. Attached was a small black and white photo. 2 girls. One was Elizabeth. The other, Evie's breath caught, was a younger version of herself. Joe Navarro stared at the photo, mouth half open. What the hell is this? That's you. She recognized the faded sweater, the frayed collar she always chewed when nervous. She didn't remember Elizabeth from her childhood, but the face beside hers told a different story. Evie took a shaky breath. No, it's not. Evie, I said it's not me, but it was. Suddenly, the case wasn't just a case. It was personal. That house, things happened there. Things best forgotten. The lead took them to Madame Gisette, a former boarding house matron who had run a home for aspiring young women in the 1930s, just blocks from where Elizabeth's body was found. But Madame Gisette still answered the door in full makeup and pearls, her eyes sharp despite her age. The house was crumbling now, with ivy choking the windows and mildew lining the walls. She was one of my girls, Gisette said, pointing to Elizabeth's picture, and so were you. Another body was found that night. You were 6, maybe 7, a solemn thing. Your mother left you here while she handled business downtown. Elizabeth was older. A jazz trio played in the corner, and laughter rolled through the room like perfume. No one noticed the detectives. They didn't want to. She traced them all to a single spot, the mirror room, an underground speakeasy hidden beneath the Orpheum Theater. It was rumored to be a haunt for Hollywood's elite, a place where actresses, politicians, doctors, and ghosts met behind polished glass. Sweet. She used to brush your hair. Evie's voice cracked. You're mistaken. Gisette laughed dryly. It's not me you should be worried about. It's what they were part of. One of the women near the powder room had collapsed. Her reflection stared back, but not quite. There was a flicker, a shadow behind her. I don't remember any of that, Evie whispered. Of course not. Evie staggered out of the building, bile rising in her throat. Joe followed close behind, his face pale. Forgotten memories. Inside was a torn photo, the same one from the killer's note. Herself and Elizabeth, children in matching sweaters. On the back, written in shaky script, slashed, drained, displayed like goddamn art installations. You knew them both. Tell me what I don't know. You okay? There's someone watching. Behind every lead, every door. Don't trust anyone? She shook her head. I need time. But there was no time. Men who believed they could make or break a woman's future with a flick of the wrist. Some wore badges, some wore robes. Elizabeth wanted out. This one was dumped near the La River also, a woman also bisected, also trained and staged, blonde, unidentified. The killer left another note. Dahlia was the first petal. The bloom was just beginning. Back at the station, Evie pinned photos of both victims to a corkboard. Red string webbing between names, dates, clubs, addresses. Joe managed to get an invite through a contact in Vice. They went that night. The mirror room was suffocating. Everything shimmered. Crystal chandeliers, gilded staircases, bodies wrapped in silk and smoke. Evia scanned the room, then saw Dr. Victor Lennox holding court in a velvet booth, a young woman at his side. She approached. "We need to talk." He raised an eyebrow. "Public place detective. What are you?" "Two women are dead," she said. Victor's eyes flicked toward the mirrors on the wall. "Part of?" He lowered his voice. "The Dahlia, she got too close. There was a circle years ago." Joe leaned in. "Out of what?" Victor tapped his glass. "A game." Before they could press further, someone screamed. Joe rushed over while Avia stared into the nearest mirror. When she turned, there was nothing. They left the mirror room with more questions than answers. Back in her apartment, Evia dug out an old box from her closet. "Keep her safe, Evie. She's all you have." "Mom." Tears welled in her eyes. Elizabeth wasn't just a victim. She was her half-sister. She had no memory of it, had blocked it out, or had it erased. Later that night, Evie got a call. From Joe. His voice was barely audible over the static. "Evie, they followed me. I think Cliff was right." The line went dead. Evie stared at the receiver. Outside, the city blinked like a dying star. The game was deeper than she feared, and it had just taken another player. Detective Evelyn Hart drove through the pouring rain with her service pistol resting in her lap. The streets glistened like black glass beneath the street lamps. She hadn't heard from Joe Navarro in 18 hours. No word, no sign, no trace. She replayed his final words over and over in her mind. Joe had marked the address in his notes the week before, circled in red ink. A place he called the Garden. "Don't trust anyone." The rain softened to mist as she turned off Sunset and approached a nondescript warehouse tucked behind a chain-link fence. The gate was unlocked. So was the door. All with distorted features, lips sewn into smiles, eyes carved into permanent terror. Dozens of photos spilled onto the floor, women in various poses. Smiling, laughing, crying, and at the center of them all, Elizabeth. Short, the entire room smelled of formaldehyde and paint thinner, like a twisted gallery. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the dark. Then she saw them. Dozens of mannequin heads, some mounted on shelves, others floating on wire frames. In the center of the room was a photography table, its lamp still warm, grainy, unstable. It showed a woman tied to a chair, a surgeon's gloved hands brushing her face. Her eyes fluttered, a scalpel gleamed. Some images were identical to the ones found at Cliff Holloway's studio, but others were new, intimate, candid. Had Joe known? Or worse than part of this? And in the corner of one frame, unmistakable, stood Joe Navarro. Evia staggered back, heart pounding. Victor Lennox had once worked at the Rancho Los Amigos Hospital, a psychiatric institute with a darker history than most. Several doctors were discharged in 1939 after an internal scandal, something about unauthorized procedures on unfit women. Lennox's name wasn't listed directly, but it didn't have to be. Suddenly, a faint buzzing sound came from the next room. A real projector. She crept forward, pushing open the door to a makeshift screening room. A black and white silent film played on the wall. Then the frame cut to black, then screaming, but why? And why hadn't she remembered? Then the smile. The gate was open. Lights were off. Evie turned off the reel, hands shaking. On the desk nearby was a note addressed to her in the same cut-and-paste style. "Your past is a real detective. Watch it long enough, and you'll see yourself in every frame." Beneath it, a photograph, Elizabeth. And behind her, a young Victor Lennox, before the gray, before the villa, in a white coat. She snatched the photo, heart beating like war drums. Back at the precinct, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Evie burst into the records room, digging through medical licenses. She found the transfer logs, and there he was, Dr. V. Leonard, a pseudonym. One of the women committed that year. Mary Hart, her mother. Evie staggered. The room spun. Her mother had been institutionalized under a false name. That night, Evie drove to Victor Lennox's villa with no warrant, no backup, and no time to wait. You drew the smile on Elizabeth's doll before we ever carved it into her face. She slipped inside, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. The place was pristine, too pristine. Like a set waiting for its next scene. At Rancho, your mother tried to stop them, tried to save the girls, but they broke her. Broke you. Then she saw the open door leading to the cellar. Victor Lennox collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. The air shifted as she descended, cold, damp, heavy. You were always curious. Even as a child, you wandered the halls. He confirmed everything, the club, the photos, the cover-ups. But not the rest. Not the twisted history between Evie, Elizabeth, and the hospital. Two girls smiling, hand in hand. One who would become the Black Dahlia. The other who would forget she was once her sister. One night, you saw what they did to Elizabeth. You screamed so loud, they had to sedate you. Your mind fractured. That's why you forgot. Below, she found a room with white tile walls, a drain in the center, and restraints on the table. A surgical room. Photos lined the wall like a morbid collage. Elizabeth. The other unnamed victim, even Evie herself. Someone had been watching her for years. Then she heard it, breathing. Victor Lennox emerged from the shadows, a scalpel in hand. I knew you'd come, he said calmly. You murdered them. No, I transformed them. Evie aimed the pistol at his chest. Victor raised his hand slowly. You don't remember, do you? You were there. I don't believe you. Don't you? Evie's hands trembled. The gun wavered. You helped us, he whispered. Shut up. You're not chasing the killer, Evelyn. You're chasing yourself, she fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the cellar. Hours later, a PT swarmed the villa. The cellar was sealed. The evidence catalogued. Lennox was dead. Joe Navarro was found bruised and tied up in the attic. He'd been taken after getting too close. That part only Evie knew, and she didn't tell. In her apartment, Evie stared at the old photo again. She picked up the lighter and burned it. There were no more petals left. But the roots went deeper than anyone would ever know. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Victor Lennox bled out on the white tiles beneath his Hollywood Hills villa. 3 weeks since Evelyn Hart shot the man who may have orchestrated the most grotesque murders in Los Angeles. History, or simply enabled them. The Black Dahlia killer was dead. The city sighed and moved on. The press was satisfied. But Evie didn't. She sat alone in the precinct long after the others left, watching dust settle on the old case file. Elizabeth Short, mutilated, bisected, drained of blood. Another girl, never identified, same fate. 2 women destroyed, and a room full of twisted photographs to prove they'd been nothing more than props in someone else's performance. Victor had claimed she was there, that she'd seen it all, even helped, but he was a killer. A manipulator, wasn't he? Still, Evie couldn't shake the images, not from dreams, not from waking life, the basement, the blood, the doll. Joe Navarro had recovered, but something between them was fractured now. He still limped when he walked, still avoided mirrors when they passed. Lennox is gone, he said one evening, standing in her doorway. It's over. Evie didn't answer. But in the far corner, just visible, was a girl. I had records dig deeper into Rancho Los Amigos. Thought you should see it. Room after room lay empty, gurneys overturned, restraints still clinging to rusted metal frames. Ghosts clung to the air. But one drawer jammed shut gave way with a wrench of metal and mold. Inside were reports, handwritten notes, and one aged photograph taken in 1936. Jo stepped in and placed a thin manila envelope on her coffee table. She opened it slowly. It showed 3 men in lab coats. One was Victor Lennox. The second wore an LPD badge on his belt. The third had his back turned. Severely unstable. Requires isolation. Standing in the shadows, watching, Evie stared at the girl's face. It was her. Later that night, Evie returned to Rancho Los Amigos. She broke in through a shattered window, flashlight beam cutting through webs of dust and memory. The facility had long since been abandoned, condemned after a fire gutted half the east wing in 1941. The building loomed in the darkness like a mausoleum. The halls groaned under her feet, paint peeled like dead skin from the walls. Not armed, not a ghost. She found her way to the lower level, the records room. Inside were file cabinets, most empty or burned. Inside was a patient chart. Mary Hart. Diagnosis: hysteria, delusions, violent opposition to treatment. Notes: subject claims knowledge of unsanctioned experiments. Scrawled on the bottom: daughter transferred to secondary home. ID: EH. Evie sank to the floor, the weight of her history pressing down like a tombstone. She had been here. And so had Elizabeth. Not half-sisters, not strangers. They were both test subjects. Used, silenced, forgotten. A sudden noise cracked through the silence. A shuffle behind her. She turned, gun drawn. Who's there? A figure stepped into the doorway. Cliff Holloway. His eyes were wild, skin pale with sweat. I saw your car outside. Thought I was the only one left digging. Evie lowered the gun slightly. Why are you here, Cliff? I was part of it. Not the killings, but the early stuff. Lennox hired me to document progress at the hospital. Said it was research. Said it would change psychiatry forever. You knew what they were doing? I didn't at first, and when I figured it out, I was scared. I ran. Something I found last week in the back of an old camera. He stepped closer. But that's not why I came. There's something else you need to see. He handed her a photo. And beside her, not blindfolded, looking directly into the lens, it was the night Elizabeth died. She was sitting in a room, blindfolded but smiling, surrounded by men in suits, their faces blurred by long exposure. Was Evie? You don't remember it because they didn't let you? You're not the killer, Evie. But you are the last witness. She said nothing. Couldn't. The photo dropped from her hands and floated to the dusty floor. Cliff crouched to pick it up, his voice gentle. You were a child. They used you, the same way they used her. Evie felt the nausea rise again. The screams in her memory, long buried, clawing to the surface. I didn't stop them, she whispered. Cliff touched her shoulder. You still can. In the weeks that followed, Evie leaked their Rancho files to the press, anonymously. She made sure Elizabeth's story wasn't reduced to gore and myth. She released the names of the doctors, the addresses of patients long forgotten, the testimony of surviving nurses. And then she left, no ceremony. Just a goodbye note pinned to Joe Navarro's desk, no badge. They turned girls into ghosts. I intend to haunt them back. 1 year later, he was reading the morning paper when a woman approached with a tray of coffee. She placed it down, hands trembling slightly. A man in a sharp gray suit sat in a plush chair in New York City. He looked up. Thanks, darling. You knew? She smiled politely. Yes, just started. As she turned to leave, the man caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Dark hair, porcelain skin. She looked familiar, too late. The steam from the coffee rose, mixing with the faint scent of gasoline. And then boom, the explosion rocked the entire floor. Somewhere in a different city, a woman walked down a narrow street, trench coat drawn tight around her. She passed a newsstand without stopping. Another unsolved death in Tinseltown's history of horror, the headline read. But beneath her coat was a file folder. Stamped on the cover, Rancho Los Amigos, Project Dahlia. Her name wasn't Evelyn Hart anymore. That name belonged to a girl who smiled at shadows and tried to bring them to justice. She wasn't chasing them now. She was erasing them, one name at a time. The end.